They know what I'm talking about. But in other words, once you learn these tricks, once you figure out these tricks or figure out the way that works best for you, you get to come out with a live recording. What do you guys think of the way that sounds? It's fucking spanking, right? You know, and the band, they freak out when they hear it. You know, now they expect it, of course. You know, I'm going back in March we're doing 2 nights at Tokyo Dome. And again, when I find a crew that works, I stick with the same crew. So I get the same truck and we'll do it the same way. But I'm always looking forward to it. But every time, this is the fourth show I mixed for them for DVD. And every one I felt sounds better than the last. And I have no idea how I'm going to pull out of my ass to make it sound better than this one. But I will. I'll figure it out. And again, we do it. But this should carry through in any type of recording, that no matter what you're dealt with, there are ways to get it the way you want it to sound. Okay, so who wants to see some of the tricks with the drums that I did? Woo! You're all interested in that, right? Okay, so we'll shut the video off and we'll take a look at that. So first and foremost, for the cats that already have seen or been to my seminar or seen some of my videos, you all know that the snare is the center of my universe. So of course, in every session, I have a cue that's called Snare Align. And as you can see it there on the top of the page, and there's a cue here for Snare Align. And what that tells me, that just gives me the visual reference of that's the point that I use to line up all the other microphones to the snare drum close mic. On this particular song, it happens to be where that snare bomb is, because I know that song and I know that that's a big open snare right there. Just real quick, if we zoom in there. You know, so roughly, you know, if I scroll down, roughly you can see that they're very close to being aligned up. You know, of course, along the way, something might have gotten nudged, you know, but at least like the overhead microphones, you know, are lined up. The tom-toms, I leave the tom-toms alone. I basically just do it with overhead mics and room mics. And since this is a live recording, there are no room mics on the drums. But okay, but the overhead mics, as you can see, there's 4 overhead mics, and they're all lined up with the snare drum, you know, where the transients begins. I physically drag them. Okay, I mean, again, I duplicate the region and then I use the word fixed. Okay, so anytime you see the word fixed in front of it, that designates to me that I've moved it and manipulated it. I always leave the original layer untouched, because sometimes it sounds better with not moving it, but not really. This also gives me the opportunity to check the phasing with the overhead microphones and make sure that everything is playing in phase and everything's right, because 99% of the time, the reasons that your drums sound thin is because something is out of phase. Okay. The other thing I do, which I've discussed in some of my seminars, is my kick and snagger. My kick and snagger. Who doesn't like a good snagger? My kick and snare trigger tracks. My kick and snare trigger tracks are used for 2 reasons. One, to trigger samples. And since you all already saw it, and I know that one of you is going to ask about it, I'm just going to cut right to the chase and highlight it. Oh, come on, open up. Oh yes, it's opening up on that screen. So just like everybody else in the room, I also steal snare drums from my brother. Please. Oh, he's not coming in today. Good, so you can all go and tell him. He's not going to be here today. But yeah, so that's the CLA snare sample that I used, that I added along with the track. The majority of this track is a live drum track, but of course, with the kick and snare trigger track, it gives me the opportunity to add without issue any samples that I want. So I create a kick and snare trigger track, which I go through in my Mix with the Master video, so I'm not going to spend the time to tell you how I do it now. But again, I make sure that every hit is dead on perfect. So that's the first reason I did the kick and snare trigger track. And Dewey's hip to all of this too. Dewey's got an SSL in his house. Dewey, everybody say hello to Dewey. Dewey and I both have SSLs in our house. Yes. Not only am I the chief engineer at my studio, I am the assistant engineer, I am the head of maintenance, I'm the T-boy, I'm also the housekeeper. I have enough spare parts to build a second SSL. I do. I've been collecting them for years. A Johnny K, of course, Johnny K trademark, to trigger a gate, to open and close the gate on a bass drum and snare drum to, again, reduce leakage. So let's go take a look at that. And no, I'm not going to solo the CLA snare drum. Okay, so when I mix, I'm constantly reinventing myself, and I'm constantly looking for new and interesting ways to get the sound I'm looking for. How many of you have seen this before? One person, and it's Dewey. So this is the Eventide E channel. This I'm assuming is modeled after the SSL E channel. I'm not saying that you should all go out and buy it, but when I did this mix, I knew at some point I was going to have to play it on an HDX system. So I was looking for a plugin that would be able to work in an HDX system and do exactly what I was looking for. So this plugin has a great sounding equalizer, it has a compressor, but most importantly, it also has a gate that is externally triggerable. Okay, so in my world, bus 63 is the track that I use to trigger the bass, is the bass drum trigger track, and bus 64 is the bus that I use to trigger the snare drum. So as you can see, it's the gate. Yeah, never hold the coffee over the console. It's a big no-no. I do it on my console, but this isn't my console. And SSL would fucking kill me. So, sidechain. Sidechains means it's running off the key up there. The key is bus 63. So we'll turn it off and you'll hear that there's not a ton of leakage, but you will hear the leakage. You know, it's just a standard bass drum, you hear leakage. But again, you multiply that by all the different microphones, the next thing you know, you're swimming in it. And by being able to control when this gate opens and closes by the key gate, so let's go and key it. Now it's being keyed off of 63, and I'll show you exactly why, because I'm just gonna mute it right here. Boom, and it goes away, okay? And all this track is little blips of the bass drum sample locked, okay? So the kick and snare, those tracks give me the flexibility to really pull the sound together. Let's take a look at you guys want to see what it's doing to the snare drum? Yeah? Yeah?
Yeah!
So obviously you can see on this particular song, the snare drum was probably out of phase with the overhead mics. So therefore, when I went through and check it, I designated it by putting the out of phase channel in it. So on this channel, again, I did a similar thing. I did use the E channel, but I did not use the E channel to trigger the gate. On this one, I used the one that you all have in your computers, and it is called the Pro Expander. So we're hearing a little bit of reverb. Let me just shut that reverb off. Da, 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 da. Snare reverb is actually going to be below the snare. That's where I like it to live. So there's the top mic of the snare drum with the gate. Here's without it. Let's throw that bottom one in. So again, those are without the gates. As you can see, the gates are being triggered off of bus 64. There's no problem with the way that sounds until you begin to put the spank on it, okay? I don't want all those cymbals coming through. So let's put the gate back on. Okay, so now we have it kind of cleaned up a little bit, okay? Now let's get to how we make it sound really freaking good. And this is a TLA trick I don't think I've shown anybody yet. I don't think we've done the mix with the master's snare ping yet. So this is my snare ping. So here's the snare drum. I'm going to turn the reverb back on because the reverb does help. Here's the snare. And then here's the ping. All of a sudden it adds some body, doesn't it? Okay. How many of you think that that's a sample? Just one person? Better hurry up with this. So this is years and years and years ago. I've had the hardware piece of this. Somebody hipped me to it, the Transient Designer. And they made a hardware piece, and I used to use it quite significantly in my mixes. And again, this is exactly how I used to use it. This is my secret, and now I'm handing it off to you guys. If you have a snare drum that you just can't get to speak really well or has no tone, this is called this setting is what I call creates the snare ping. And you all heard the difference with it in and out. It adds this really nice tone. By duplicating the snare track that you have, taking all the attack off and raising up all the sustain, again, it brings up all the notes that are within the snare drum. And again, and then you just screw around with how you want the gate to work. Now, let's solo that track. I'm going to turn the reverb off. And we're going to take the gate out. All right, so you see what I'm doing with the EQ? I'm really focusing on that mid-range bark. Okay, now, for my ear, I was having an issue with the amount of hi-hat and top end that's leaking through it. So how do you fix that? You put a freaking de-esser in there. Okay? If you just consider the cymbals, the de-essers, again, the 902 has also been my trick over the years to get rid of hi-hats out of snare drum channels. Use it in high frequency mode, find the channel, boom, boom, boom. You're off to the races. See, now I've just given you all my tricks. I expect you all to do this mix for me. Okay? And we end up with a drum sound. And now we're just going to move over to some tom-toms. Look, I'm going to give you a choice. We can do a Q&A, or I can show you some cool shit with the tom-toms. Your choice.
Tom-toms! Yeah! Tom-toms! Shit! Cool!
Okay. So, in a live recording, or two, to create just a tiny tick of the transient of every hit and create a new track and use that track to trigger a gate to open the tom-toms. And here's what that sounds like. first things first, let me just turn the gate off. I want you to hear what it sounds like before, and then we'll turn the gates back on. Unusable, right? How many of you have had to deal with that problem? With all that cymbal leakage? It fucking sucks, right? So this is the quick way around it. Just create a track. Just create a track that takes the transient of the hit. Trigger 2 does a great job at it. You render it, and then you send that down a bus, trigger gate. And then it sounds like this. I thought I did 3 of them. Okay, and then in the track, and there is another little secret trick that I'm doing in there, but we're just gonna have to save that when you come and see me with Mick for the Masters. Live drums, live concert. And here are the trigger tracks up at the top. If I can find my mouse.